Ministry graphics are very flexible, editable graphics for churches that you can take and use as is, or edit to fit your next event, service, or whatever you want. Because of how flexible they are, going about using or editing a ministry graphic can be a little bit daunting. So let's jump into some of the graphics and figure out what approach we want to take. We're going to look at multiple methods of using these graphics, all the way from using the graphics as is through to how we can customize these, not just in Photoshop, but also in Canva, ProPresenter, or other apps. Let's look at this Independence Day graphic from StoryLoop to see what we get with a ministry graphic download. We have the source files folder, which are editable, and we'll come back to that later, but then we see a previews folder. We have a set of 7 graphics, each intended to be used differently. First up is the lower third, and this is saved as a transparent PNG. This means we can overlay this onto other content, such as a live stream. Let's jump over to ProPresenter, and here I have a slide with a video trigger, and you might have your video input for your live stream here. Dropping the lower third onto the slide thumbnail directly could clear out any triggers we have, so let's edit the slide instead and bring in our lower third. Move the lower third into place by dragging and dropping, or using the auto align buttons in our shape tab to get it perfectly centered. Now our lower third will display in the foreground layer, leaving the background layer for our input video. We've also got a notes slide here, which is where a lot of clear space is left in the center of the graphic for a large block of text. Let's drag it onto a new slide, and ProPresenter will set it to the background layer. Then we can edit the slide, and we're given a text box where we could add anything we like. Jumping back to our folder though, we can see our title slide. This is the main preview image of this download on StoryLoop. Again, we can use this slide as is by simply dragging it into our presentation, and that's going to be shown on the main display we have in our church, whether that's a TV, projector, or LED wall. So those are our screen options, but we also are given some social media options. If today was Independence Day, then I could easily grab this post or story version and upload them as is to social media. But we're also given these frame options as well, which are transparent PNGs. And these are great as they allow you to use your own photos alongside the professional design style of the ministry graphic. Let's say you hosted a day in the park for Independence Day and you wanted to share one of your photos. We'll go to Photoshop and drag in our frame. This will create our Photoshop document at the right size for us. Then we'll bring in the photo from our event and we'll use the resize handles to get this photo to fill the whole frame. As you resize, just make sure that you hold down the Shift key so that the image doesn't distort either horizontally or vertically. Now I'll move the photo to be our bottom layer and our graphic is ready to export and post. Let's take this a step further and not just use the JPEGs and PNGs, but let's dive into how we can customize them using our PSD file. I'll open it in Photoshop first, but don't worry, we'll head over to Canva and some other alternatives soon. Our document opens and shows us all of our artboards on the right, along with the original layers on the left. Artboards are a feature of Photoshop that allows you to have multiple canvases of different sizes all within the one document. And that way, when we go to export, we can choose to export all artboards as separate files, or maybe just export a single graphic. From the export screen, we can also adjust other options, such as dropping the resolution from 4K down to HD. But going back to the document, I just want to show you another benefit to having all of the artboards within the same file, and this is through linked smart objects. Each part of our design is linked so that if we edit the text on one artboard, the text is going to be changed across all artboards. We've brought our linked smart objects right up to the top of the layer stack here. Let's edit our title layer by double-clicking it. Alternatively, we could have also right-clicked that layer and chosen Edit Contents. But keeping our eyes on the layer stack, we'll see a few effects applied to a folder of text. Let's open the text folder and we'll see all of our text is here and ready for us to edit. I'm going to change this to say 4th of July celebration by pressing T on my keyboard, which changes to the text tool. Then I'll click on the text layer and it will become editable to me. After typing my new text, I'll change back to the Move tool so that I can reposition my layers, and I'll hide the other layers of text that I didn't use. As you edit your text, you may get a notification saying that Photoshop doesn't have the font that was used in the original design. If that's the case, just go back to the folder you downloaded, and if you double-click on the font link, it will open in a web browser for you to download. I'm happy with this font for now, but we'll look at using alternative fonts a little bit later. So with this text edited, all we have to do to apply it to our design is close the smart object by hitting the X on the tab and hit save when Photoshop prompts you to. Back in the main document, we can see our smart object flexing its muscles. The new text has applied across all of our artboards, so we've only had to edit the text once. I'll just double check the placing on each artboard and make any minor tweaks that I need to finish up the design, and these are now ready to export. Now let's look at a ministry graphic that needs a bit more love. I've got this guest speaker template that I really want to use. Looking at the previews folder, we can see that we can't really use these as is. You probably don't have Dan Stevers coming to your church on this date, and your service times are probably also different. So these exports aren't exactly helpful for posting, but they will come in handy later when we're using a program other than Photoshop to make our design and we need something to reference. So before we get started with editing, let's look at our fonts folder to see what fonts we're going to need. I see Helvetica is being used in this design, and I could follow this link to install Helvetica, but I want to show you a trick for using alternate fonts whilst keeping the same design style. Let's go to a website called Typewolf, and from here you can see I've already searched for Helvetica, and I'm given options for alternatives on the side. We have our Adobe font matches, which is what I'll use in Photoshop, and when I show you how to bring this into Canva, we'll work with using a free Google font as well. So I'm going to open our Photoshop file now and twirl away all of the artboard layers on the left to simplify what we're looking at. You'll notice that we've got an extra smart object here compared to our Independence Day graphic. Before, we had edit title and edit background, but now we also have edit photo. Depending on the ministry graphic that you download, you might have extra smart objects like this, and these just give you even more flexibility when it comes to the design. Let's just say I have a guest speaker coming called Eric Manning. I'm going to jump into the title smart object by double clicking, and I'm going to try and edit this text. You'll notice right away that Photoshop tells me that Helvetica is missing. That's okay because we've already decided that we're going to replace it and use our Adobe alternative, Nuhas Grotesque. So I'm just going to click replace here, and I'm going to type in Eric Manning, and then I'm going to replace the font. I'll resize using the move tool and hit enter to save or click the little tick. I'll also adjust the other information that I need to, and then we're left with the guest speaker text. You'll notice that even though we don't have Helvetica installed, the text still looks normal, so you only have to change the font on the layers that you're actually editing. I want this all to match as closely as possible to the original design though, so I'm going to change this text as well. Now we're done here, so let's close and save our smart object and watch it bring all of our edits across each artboard. Next, we're just going to need to change this photo, so I'll open the smart object for that and find all of these layers. This is the great thing about Photoshop, is that all effects aren't baked into the photo, but they're actually available as layers that we can apply to a new photo or even tweak further. I'll bring in my photo of Eric, and we can see that it has already applied our black and white filter. When I move the photo up and down in the layer stack, you can see how each effect is either applied or taken away. Let's bring up the resize handles by pressing Command T, and if you drag your mouse around while holding the spacebar, you can also move around your design. If you need to zoom in and out, just hold Alt while you're scrolling. Now that we've repositioned it, that's looking good, and I'm going to press the tick, or you can hit enter on your keyboard to confirm the resizing adjustment that we've made. And I can see that the clipping mask hasn't applied to my photo, so I'm actually just going to drag this down a layer, and this little icon here shows me that the clipping mask is applied. This clipping mask is simply giving me those rounded corners that I want. I'm going to hit the X again to save the smart object, and again we can see this is applied across all artboards, and we're ready to export the artboards as I showed earlier. So let's look at how we can edit these ministry graphics if we don't have Photoshop. I'm going to show you the free online editor you can run within your web browser called Photopea, and I may have had to Google how to pronounce this one. Photopea can open Photoshop documents, and it has a lot of the same functionality as Photoshop, all available for free. I'll drop our source file into Photopea, and unfortunately, Safari has force reloaded the page. That's because we're working with a pretty large file size, and Safari doesn't like using too much RAM, so we're going to have to switch over to Chrome for this one, and we've got no problems. As we're opening our Photoshop document in Photopea, you can see that it's already preloading some alternative fonts. You could take note of these fonts if you want to use them, but I've already got a font in mind. Our layers are now over on the right-hand side, and I'm just going to twirl those away once again to simplify what we're seeing. Just like Photoshop, we double-click to edit a smart object, and as we open it up, we can see the fonts loading. Let's adjust the text and resize. In Photoshop, I'd use Command T to show the resize handles, but because we're in a web browser, that shortcut actually opens a new tab. So we're going to hit Command Alt T to resize, and I'll hold Shift as I resize to keep the text from squashing, and hit Enter when I'm done to confirm my resize. Now it's time to adjust the font, and we'll use the free Google font, Inter. We'll use the black version for the thicker letters and make any final size tweaks. I'll leave the other text out for the sake of this example and just close out my smart object. Chrome's going to warn us that this doesn't actually save the smart object, so let's use the File menu to save the smart object instead. With our text applied across the design, let's do the photo. I'll double click into the Photo Smart object, grab the photo from my hard drive, resize it, and then I'll hit the tick to put it in place. I'll move the layer down, but I can see the clipping mask didn't automatically apply. So I'm going to right click on my photo and then click on Clipping Mask. Now I can hide the original photo, save the smart object, and we're done. When it comes to exporting, we don't have as many customizable options as Photoshop, but when we choose our format, we'll be given a zip download that contains each artboard as an individual JPEG or PNG. Now let's take a look at a more basic editor such as Canva. I've already started a new 16:9 document, and I'm going to start the design using one of the blanks in our ministry graphic download. These blanks make it easy to rebuild any graphic in an editor that doesn't support Photoshop files. Let's bring in our title slide blank and resize it to fill the canvas. Next, I want to replicate the photo, and to get our rounded rectangle look, I'll search the Elements tab for frames. I found a frame here that matches the original design, and I'll bring in my photo of Eric. You can see as I drag around this photo, Canva will try and place it within the frame if I'm hovering over it. But before we do that, I just want to make my creative adjustments first. Using the Edit Photo button, I'll remove all the saturation to make this black and white, and I'll play with the contrast. I'll also head to the Crop tool to focus this photo in on Eric. Now I'll drop the image into the frame by dragging it over, and I'll change the outline color of the frame by choosing white from the palette on the left. Let's get this image in the right spot and go back and look at our preview image to see how close we're getting to the original design. I'll add my text, resize it, and set the font and color. I remember from the original design that the first name of the guest speaker has a larger font as well, so I'll bring that into a new text box and resize it accordingly. There was also another text in a rounded rectangle, so I'm going to search the Elements tab for something I can use. I don't have a Pro account, so I'll avoid anything with the crown icon, and it's not hard to find another rounded rectangle here that I can drag in. I'll add a new text box on top, and we're looking great. The rounded rectangle is using a color that is not part of the original design, so let's change that. And I love using this image palette feature on the left, where Canva gives you the options to use colors that it is selected from both our background image and also our guest speaker image. I'm going to select this purple here, which is a perfect way to match the theme. Lastly, I remember an arrow element that I can find in the Canva search, and you could continue tweaking the design to get it perfect, but I just wanted to show you how quickly we could put this together in Canva. Sometimes, though, if we're in a rush before a service, we need a way to put a graphic together that's even faster. Let's look at how we can make this lower third directly within ProPresenter. Let's edit our main slideshow and bring in the lower third blank. Move the lower third blank to the bottom of the layer stack and lock it so that we don't accidentally edit it later. We'll type in our text, change the font to our free font, and rather than setting a font size using a number, we'll change the text scaling to simply move up or down. That way we can resize the text box, and that will resize our text as well. After left aligning the text, we'll start on the photo by creating a new rounded rectangle from the plus button at the top left-hand side of the working space. Let's resize it and hold down Shift as we go to keep its proportions. In the fill options, we'll choose Media and select our image. This is pretty zoomed out, so in the fill options, we'll select Custom Fit and then hit the Edit Scale button to reveal these black handles around our image, which we can use to resize. Once that's looking good, we'll jump into the inspector and head to the Effects tab, where we can apply an Adjust Color effect to remove our saturation and work on contrast. Let's pull in our lower third preview so we can see what we're aiming at, and I can see I need to tighten the corners of this rounded rectangle by dragging this blue handle. That way it matches our preview. I'll quickly reposition and resize this text to match, and move on to the guest speaker pill shape. I'll create a pill shape by using a rounded rectangle to start and setting it to white, and then adjusting the corners with the blue handle to be as large as they can. Rather than making a new text box on top of this pill, we can just add text directly through the right-click menu and make it play nice by changing and scaling the options to move up or down based on the container the same way as I did for the speaker name. I'm going to play with the font and use the built-in eyedropper tool to select a color that comes directly from our design. I'd like to let this text breathe a little bit more like the preview, so I'll adjust the spacing and in turn add a margin to counteract the spacing changes that I made so that the text isn't hugging the edges. I'm going to leave the date off for this example, but I'm hoping you get the gist. And that's how we can use ministry graphics as is, or utilize the blanks and PSD to maximize our options and customize these graphics to be exactly what we need. Happy editing, and be sure to join our Facebook members group to throw in any questions you have or to share how you've edited your story loop designs.